differently from the usual in that we have quite a structured presentation. So I'm going to tell you a tale. It's a story about a spy and a city, and possibly a city of spies, of Budapest in the era of John le Carré and Robert Ludlum. We are 2.5 hours from that other city of spies, Vienna, and in a sense, Budapest was a mirror image of that, the first port of call, because it was less repressive than Prague, because it was more developed than Bucharest, and less chaotic than Warsaw. It was here, on the edge of the Iron Curtain, that various ne'er-do-wells washed up. A place where IRA arms were smuggled south through Yugoslavia, where members of the Red Army faction hid out before returning to West Germany. Budapest did not welcome international terror, but it had, in the tortuous logic of international communism, developed an accommodation with it. It's these contradictions that we want to play through tonight. With me is my valued colleague, Dániel Farkas, who is a researcher here, and co-author, along with Adam LeBor, who couldn't be here tonight, of the paper Chasing Out the Jackal, which is available on all good Danube Institute websites. But beyond politics, we want to use tonight to go inside a city now vanished, that stood on the ground we inhabit, which some of you may even recall. Cold War Budapest, a place where hard currency bars on the Grand Boulevard filled up with expatriates, giving it an unusually cosmopolitan feel. A place whose universities were educating the next generation of the Internationale, preparing to export revolutions to India, Africa, and South America. And where people still found ways to make merry despite their political suffocation. Carlos the Jackal, of course, always said that he felt safest in Budapest, and there were good reasons for that. Cupped in the Buda Hills, fed on goulash communism, he was able to live about as normal a life as an international terrorist mastermind ever did. Carlos spent 6 years here, from 79 to 85. And I'm going to tell the story of those years, and a bit more about who Carlos was. After all, most of us just have a smear of a sense. There's that iconic passport photo, and then there's a sort of an info dump of stuff that happened in the 70s to do with terrorism, some of which was Carlos, some of which was all sorts of other crazy dudes. And then in between, Dániel is going to fill us in on the details. He's spent a lot of time in the National Archives researching this, and there'll be pictures, video, and even perhaps time for a few questions. So, let's start at the airport, Ferihogy. It's the end of August 1979, and the man collecting his bag from the conveyor at Ferihogy Airport is traveling on a Yemeni diplomatic passport. He's slightly overweight, he's moon-faced, he has kind of dusky good looks. He's Venezuelan by birth and trained in Moscow, blooded in Beirut, and wanted across Europe for murder, bombing, and the kidnapping of 11 oil ministers in Vienna. His name is Ilich Ramírez Sánchez, but the world knows him as Carlos the Jackal. The Hungarian state security knows he's coming, of course, and they've agreed to host him, reluctantly, under pressure from the mothership, the Soviet Union, and also from their Libyan and Syrian allies. But they also want him to know something from the early times that he sets foot in Hungary. We're watching you. This is within a month of him arriving in town. They stage a car chase. Carlos leaves the airport. Hungarian agents in unmarked vehicles begin tailing him conspicuously. They get more conspicuous, he gets more evasive. The chase escalates all the way into the Buda Hills to a villa on Ven Street that the Hungarian internal security had also arranged for him. And Carlos, being Carlos, responds in the only way he knows how. He opens fire. There is more of a chase, and then they slope off. Carlos drives on, his duty-free purchases still intact. Welcome to Budapest. Dániel, was this standard operating procedure for the Hungarian security services to open fire, to chase a man visibly like that? What was the methodology here?
Thanks, Gavin. I wouldn't say it was standard procedure for the Secret Service, but this kind of gray zone pressure for the Hungarian foreign policy certainly was. As far as we see from original sources, Hungary participated in Moscow's grand imperial adventures throughout the Third World only half-heartedly. They always wanted to spend just a bit less money that the Soviets wanted to. They just wanted to host a dozen less terrorists that the Soviets wanted to. They just wanted to give away just a bit less weapons that the Soviet wanted them to do. So János Kádár's Hungary, as far as I understand, was really closely towing the Soviet line, but on the sides it tried to elbow out a bit of space. So yes, chasing out a terrorist with unmarked cars throughout the Buda Hills was not like every day, but it's kind of a very very theatrical example of Hungary trying to at the same time appeasing the Soviets, but also trying to do what it wants.
Okay. Tell us a bit about the Hungarian security services as they were constituted. Obviously, East Germany had the Stasi, Romania had the Securitate. Where within that gradient was the Hungarian security service?
The Hungarian security service were divisions of the Interior Ministry. They had only serial numbers, that is 3/1, 3/2, 3/3, 3/4. As for foreign intelligence, for counter-espionage, for interior surveillance, and so on. And as for their methods, they were pretty professional. I wouldn't say they were that invasive, as judging by the sources, as the Stasi or Securitate did. At least they just didn't have this kind of system where they wanted to control every step of their citizens. Obviously, there were a pretty good fight on everyone of importance. And also sometimes people who were not that important politically or economically. But generally, they were on the lighter side of communist security services, if we can say that.
So they were feared but not terrifying. Would that be about right?
Depending on who you ask.
Okay, yes.
So,
and depending on what you did.
For example, if you were like a 16-year-old, a guy in Józsefváros, and your father was like a worker, it's possible that your father met or you met internal security 3/3, but not really. But for example, a very similar 16-year-old guy told me who lived in a Hungarian embassy, was son of a Hungarian diplomat in a South American embassy. He said that I spent the whole of my childhood in the embassy, and they watched all of my steps. So it really depended on where you were, in the societal hierarchy.
Great. Okay, back to Carlos. So, to understand how Carlos got to Budapest, I guess we need to know a bit about who he was. And that takes us to Caracas, 1949, the year of his birth. He came from money. He was from an oil-rich family, and his dad was a mad communist, was part of the Communist Party of Venezuela. At 16, his mother moved the family to London. He spent a few years there, and then he was sent, along with his two brothers, to Moscow's famous Patrice Lumumba University, which was essentially the the hothouse for the next generation of revolutionaries in the global war against the capitalist evil West. So Carlos lasts 2 years here, and then he is expelled. Circumstances of his expulsion are a little bit murky, but it's fair to say that it was not an unreasonable expulsion. He had a playboy lifestyle. He was already something of a womanizer. Perhaps we can return to that. He'd participated in some pro-Palestinian demonstrations, and at that point in the cycle, the Soviets were unsure how they felt about Palestine and the movement, and particularly they were keen to damp down demonstrations by foreign students. He might have been involved in a series of brawls too, particularly with an Egyptian guy, and just overall he was a poor academic performer. He was not, by any account, a serious student. So, next things next, he washes up in Jordan. Daniel, why does he wash up in Jordan?
It's actually was a very well-established pipeline. You have the sons of all these either communist or pro-communist dignitaries of the Third World sending their children to the Socialist Bloc, be it, in this case, South American party cadre, or like even a Sudanese warlord. You choose your own adventure. And most of these guys turning into not that pro-Soviet. Sometimes they just turn literally just these pro-Soviet guys, but the more extreme ones turning into adventurers who even the Soviets despised, in a sense, or they were at least wary of. And because you have in these places, for example, it was the most celebrated case, Patrice Lumumba University, people from all around the world, from Vietnam to Venezuela and to Jordan, all of these radicals are meeting there. They are kind of watched by the Soviets that they are radical. They are too radical even for us. But then they can, as they say, network together, and they can form new alliances, sort of. And a lot of these people from Venezuela to South Asia to Western Europe actually converged in these networks of Palestinian or pro-Palestinian radicals, and then went on to receive training on, especially before the 1971 expulsion of Palestinians from Jordan, training in Palestinian refugee camps, military camps, depending on which political affiliation you ask.
Okay, so he's in Jordan, and then he finds his way to Beirut, and in Beirut he meets this guy, Wadi Haddad, who is the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, not to be confused with the Popular Front for Palestine or the Palestine Popular Liberation Front. So he takes the name Carlos, which is, it has no particular significance. He was South American, so they gave him that kind of name. And then he, with barely a bit of prompting, he starts killing people. And, no, and it didn't take much effort. This is 1973. This man is Joseph Seif. He was the chairman of Marks and Spencer's, which was a very large supermarket conglomerate in Britain. And he goes to Seif's house. He manages to talk the maid into taking him up to see Seif. Seif is actually in the bathroom at that point. He opens the door, shoots him pretty much point blank. Somehow the bullet ricochets off of Seif's top lip, and he survives. Carlos fires again. The gun jams, and Carlos runs away. So, not a particularly auspicious start. But pretty soon, he's up to some new hijinks. He's at Orly Airport with his friend and comrade-in-arms, Johannes Weinrich, and he's firing rocket launchers at 2 El Al planes. Just sort of thing you do of a Sunday in Paris, I believe. Happily, this is not one of his greatest hits either. The planes are not, they are missed. So essentially, it's a comic tale, Eric. There's a lot of pathos in here. And so he has to move on again. And this time, he manages to kill one of his own, a member of the Popular Liberation Front of Palestine, or the Liberation Popular Front of Palestine, Michel Mukarbal. So Mukarbal had turned Turk. He was an agent. He was a double agent now, and he'd been interrogated by 2 French security officers at a party, and then Carlos kind of bursts in and wipes him out and wipes out the 2 French security agents. So this is him, making his name on the scoreboard. And shortly after that, he becomes genuinely notorious. He becomes known, and this passport photo starts to go around the world. And the name Carlos the Jackal was actually something that was given to him by a Guardian journalist in 1973. And he had just seen a copy of Frederick Forsyth's The Day of the Jackal on the shelf of a house where Carlos was staying. It was basically a safe house. There's actually no evidence that Carlos ever read The Day of the Jackal, but there is evidence that he was quite pleased with this nickname, and he found it suited his psychopathic style. So, Daniel, I guess there's a question about Carlos that shapes everything that comes after. We've seen some of his hijinks, but was he doing this because he was deeply ideological, or was he doing it for the fame and perhaps the money?
Yeah, very simply, I would say both. But what really distinguished him, not his skill of shooting people in the face from like a feet or so, but for ideologically, he was this kind of let's kind of overthrow the Western international order and let's see what comes after that. So he didn't have like a much stronger ideology than like you have like your average hippie or Paris student protester in 1968. But he had the mentality that most of these would-be terrorists, for example, the Weather Underground guys who basically gave up after they blew up their own flat in the US, that he had the ruthlessness to kill. So most of the these student radicals who went on to become terrorists didn't really become one or didn't really became successful because they just didn't have the stomach to kill people, to kill again, and to just to keep up with this kind of life. Carlos had that had that mentality in him. So I would say that it was his very distinct personality that propelled him over your average armed radical of the 70s. It wasn't like a very specific, very sophisticated set of ideologies.
Okay, so would you say he was a psychopath, as we would now describe it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like a specific, psychiatric condition, but yeah, if you say that, yeah,
he was
kind
determined.
of. I would say yes. If you want to call this a psychopath, yeah, kind of.
Well, he was a man who followed through, but now we're going to get to a moment where he didn't quite follow through, and that is the OPEC ministers' meeting, which was held in December 1975 at the OPEC headquarters in Vienna. And we've got some footage of it here to play for you. Okay. So Carlos and a team of 6, including members of the revolutionary cells, the West German guerrilla group, stormed the building during a ministers' meeting. They take 11 oil ministers hostage including the Iranian and Saudi ministers. The operation is ordered by his boss, Wadi Haddad, and Haddad's instructions are explicit: execute the Iranian and Saudi oil ministers. But Carlos refuses. He negotiates a flight out instead. The hostages are eventually released, but of course for Haddad, this is an unforgivable act of disobedience. Carlos is expelled from the PFLP. And it's this moment, his refusal to pull the trigger, that actually becomes the hinge point of his entire career. From here on, he's basically a freelance terrorist. He has no home organization truly to speak of, although he goes to Aden in 1978, where he founds something called the Organization of Arab Armed Struggle, which is backed by East Germany's Stasi and Gaddafi's Libya. But it's really just him and a couple of friends who we'll get to shortly. But as the heat turns up, he needs somewhere to live where he can feel safe. And so he heads to Budapest. Daniel, why Budapest? Of all the places in the Eastern Bloc he could have gone, I mean, we sort of mentioned the deficits of Berlin and Czechoslovakia, but why does he come to Budapest specifically?
I think there are two major features in Budapest that really draws him. One is interestingly connected to this dodgy foreign policy, the same why he was chased across the Budapest streets. So Kadar has this strategy of, elbowing a bit of space on the sides, like a bit of, moving space around Soviet foreign policy directives. But to have this, informal breathing space, he really needs to closely toe the Soviet line. So, for example, while Ceausescu's Romania got much more side deals with the French, for example, or Bulgaria with the West Germans, Carlos rightly says that he's the safest in Budapest because he knows that Budapest Hungary is the place which won't got like major side deals, because they want just this little informal breathing space on the sidelines. But for this, they will be much more obedient to the Soviet Union as the mentioned countries. The other is just the better quality of life. After 1968, Hungary leans on Western tourism to prop up foreign exchange reserves, which they don't have, but a bit less deficits. And obviously the policy of better living standards. And this makes Budapest, in comparison with other capitals, just a bit better place to live.
A bit livelier. Okay, well, we're going to take you back in time now to Budapest. We've had a bit of debate over when this footage was shot. It's said on the clip that it was the early 80s, but the clothes seem a little bit more modern than that. Just take a look and see what you think. But this is your milieu. This is where we are, Budapest, early 80s. seems kind of... early 80s, the video said. So, yeah. But it seems kind of jolly, doesn't it? And it's certainly jollier, the happiest barracks in the bloc, etc. So there is a private sector of sorts, and by 1982, about 3/4 of Hungarian families are participating in some way in this second economy. And you could buy things. You could buy Coca-Cola from 1968 onwards. Pepsi was here too. Levi's jeans were produced locally from 1978 onwards. Adidas had a deal. The state-run department store, Scala, which opened in 1976, stocked Western goods. So by the early 80s, a visitor from East Berlin or Prague would find Budapest shops genuinely shocking in their abundance. Daniel, is this true?
Yes, definitely. We need to say that this was eventually a failing strategy, because Hungary just didn't have the foreign balance to continue on, while also, maintaining this socialist economy and socialist type development. But yes, living standards were generally much better, and as I said, because of this strategy of attracting tourism for foreign exchange, it was certainly needed to be a bit livelier to, just to attract Western tourists.
Okay, and Budapest has a particular atmosphere, in part driven by its need to attract tourists. It's a city of spies and of barflies, and often those are the same thing. There's a circuit of hard currency bars along the Grand Boulevard. So this was the idea that you could go into these bars, and it's kind of a bit like now, I suppose. You can pay with euros now, but in those days you would pay with US dollars or French francs or Swiss francs or any other kind of francs you liked. And that enabled a certain elite class to emerge within this sphere, and it allowed for the provision of high-status Western goods and good times. So Carlos checks... so there was several bars here. So we've got the Nirvana, we've got the MK, we've got the Halo, and we've got every licentious town must have a Moulin Rouge, and this was Budapest. So these are places where you could meet diplomats, intelligence agents, and also prostitutes. And many of the prostitutes, it transpires, were in the pay of state security one way or another, and perhaps you would be led back to a bugged house and there would be some compromat on you, just, lying around there somewhere, just in case. And so Carlos, when he originally comes to Budapest, checks into this brand new edifice that some of you may recognize. It's been cladded a bit more since then, but there it is in all its glory. The Hotel Duna Intercontinental. It's your place, Eric. It's your place. Yeah. You've got, I think they've kind of put more parking on that level now, haven't they? Yeah. The green spaces are long gone. Anyway, so it was called the Forum, and it was the hub of the thing that Budapest was trying to be, a sort of a citadel for internationalism. And immediately Carlos checks in, and he starts behaving in a way that horrifies his Hungarian hosts. He's flashing the cash in the bar, and he, in one notorious incident, pulls out a pistol in the bar and starts waving it around. And then a West German tourist recognizes him in one of the hard currency bars. And the Hungarians, of course, see all of this because they are constantly monitoring him. Daniel, how were they monitoring him? How did it work day to day?
When you look at the kind of expat scene of Kádár era Budapest, you see that along the agent files that you see in the archives of the state security today, that a lot of the translators who worked in official or semi-official capacities were reporting to the state security. And also, as you mentioned yourself, you have the staff of these hard currency places. Oftentimes it wasn't watertight, obviously, but you have those people also reporting on guests. And for like high-profile guests as Carlos, you will find literally dedicated teams following them. So you have their flats wiretapped, you have specific agents surveilling them wherever they go, and through this, kind of intrusive, so like wiretapping and literally just surveillance, and also from societal contacts, most of the expats was pretty well understood by Hungarian intelligence. Their networks, their friends were mapped, they knew what places they prefer, what people did they meet at how many times. One of the exceptions to this rule wasn't Carlos and the Arabs. They were pretty well surveilled. Those people who could evade this issue was mostly the Africans, especially the Nigerians, because they spoke either Igbo or Hausa. And the Hungarians didn't have those translators. Yeah, they have Arabic, they had French, English, and so on, Spanish, obviously. So Carlos, to turn back on that, was pretty well surveilled in every step of his day-to-day activities, wherever he went. Also, he literally rented his place on Vend Street from a member of the state security. So we don't have the exact layout of the wiretapping and how much wire was stuck where in that place, but it is pretty sure that he was well wired.
Okay, so you mentioned the house on Venn Street. So after Carlos checks out of the Hotel Duna Intercontinental, he gets this. I mean, it's not a house; it's a villa. It's literally a villa. There's been a bit of speculation between us conferring this afternoon about whether this is the house. So the notes say that it's on the corner of Venn Street and Bimbo, which is up in the Buda Hills. It's the 2nd District, Rosadom, and as many of you will already know, it's one of the nicest places in town and still very prestigious to this day. So he's not alone. He's with this woman, Magdalena Kopp. Magdalena was born in 1948 in Neu-Ulm, Bavaria. She was originally a photographer, and she drifted, in the way that a lot of people did in those days, into radical chic. She gets mixed up with some groups in Frankfurt, and they introduce her to the Revolutionary Cells, which was the same group that participated in the OPEC raid. So she'd been in a relationship, in fact, prior to meeting Carlos, with Johannes Weinrich, who you may remember from the El Al bombings, and who is Carlos's constant companion. So there's a kind of a ménage à trois thing happening here. And strangely enough, Carlos was a notorious womanizer, but in some sense he loved this woman. All the reports that we have suggest that it was a warm, loving relationship, and they live in the bugged villa. They plan terrorist operations, perhaps over breakfast across Western Europe, and yeah, according to every account, they are a couple, which is what makes it such a sexy story. But Daniel, how did Magdalena fit into the operational side of things? Was she a full participant or more of a companion? And just give us a sense of who she was.
She was a typical product of late 60s West German radicalism. This is the generation that some call Hitler's children, that generation that tries to not only repudiate but actively erase the the sins of their parents' generation. And she's born 1948, so literally her parents' generation in this case. They also have very hybrid ideas about overthrowing capitalism, the Western order in general. Most of them, as you know, is like on eternal Groundhog Day. As many people in many places in the Western world, they are really galvanized by a Middle Eastern war, by the Six-Day War, which means the kind of the catastrophe of the Palestinian liberation movement, and really galvanizes this kind of irregular warfare against the state of Israel and its allies. And so they are by 1970 they are going into really active radicalism, that is really armed struggle. One of the factions, which is the more well-known Red Army faction, which is actually it has much more clout, but it was just this very dysfunctional cult of people around a couple of psychopaths. They were really inefficient. In contrast to that, the revolutionary cells, which Magdalena was member to, was much more efficient because they were not hierarchical, but they were a network of loosely affiliated radicals. And so they could operate much more independently, and they were not going to these loopholes as the Red Army faction really quickly did from 1971, when their leaders were arrested and they just spent 6 years trying to liberate them. So Magdalena was really an armed fighter, and she participated actively in planning operations, and she also participated in them, like the 1975 December OPEC attack as well. So she wasn't just, a round terrorist, she was literally a terrorist.
Okay, so that's the love interest. Let's expand a bit more on the network. Carlos's inner circle. This is Johannes Weinrich, her first lover, Magdalena's first lover, and he, of course, was shooting the El Al jets, but day to day, he covers Carlos's operational side. By this point, Carlos is sort of withdrawn from the, just going into towns and blowing things up side of things. He is into strategy and comms, or PR, you might call it. He's the one who takes the meetings with Gaddafi. He's the one who goes to the Baathists in Syria, while Johannes is doing, logistics. Next is Bruno Bruguet. He is Swiss. He's sometimes described as French. He is Carlos's bomb maker. That's his skill, and he'll become central to the story quite shortly. Of course, there were many other people traversing Budapest at that moment in time. Bill Ayers was here. He was talking to the Viet Cong in 1968. And then there was Alain Frier, who was a gun runner, and he did a lot of work with the IRA, and he shipped arms south from Budapest with the tacit blessing of the Hungarian government through Yugoslavia and down, I think, by boat to Northern Ireland. And then there was this man, Ismail Oflu, who was a Turk who was at the center of the gun running and drug smuggling systems of the time, all of which would nexus through Budapest, which obviously is a fantastic joining point between the Dalmatian coast and Vienna. So,
sorry to interrupt.
yes.
Isn't the Bill Ayers? Isn't that the Northwestern University professor who used to be a underground?
Yes, that is. Sorry, did I miss that part? Yes, he is the linchpin of the Weather Underground, who Daniel referenced, and blowing up his own apartment and going no further. For anyone who doesn't know about the Weather Underground, if you've seen the recent film One Thing After Another, it's basically based on them.
Yeah, it's contact of Barack Obama in his early days, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's a free man. He's a university professor, basically.
Yeah, I did when I was at the University of Chicago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice for you.
Yeah.
Shook his hand.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just put myself in the story.
Okay, so we've got all of these people, and then we get to another significant milestone, back to the A story in the life of Carlos, which is when he starts to go on something of a rampage, which ultimately leads to his downfall, and that rampage is in partly occasioned by love. So we start in Munich, 1981. He bombs Radio Free Europe, 20 kg of explosive piped into the basement of this building. 4 injured, none dead, but the place is gutted, as you can see. And obviously that's a warning. Don't try and make Europe free. And then we move on to the Paris attacks, of which there are 4. The first is in February of 1982. Carlos sends Magdalena Kopp and Bruno Brugge to Paris. Their target is the office of Al-Watan al-Arabi, a dissident Syrian newspaper. They succeed, but they're both arrested. Magdalena ends up in a French prison. And Carlos's response is immediate and vicious. He goes on a bombing campaign for love, you might say. He bombs a French cultural center in Beirut. He bombs the Paris-Toulouse TGV train, killing 4. On April 19th, he bombs the Air France offices in Vienna. On April 22nd, the Rue Marbeau, which is chosen almost at random. He's trying to terrorize France into releasing his girlfriend. This is no longer about Palestine or imperialism as such. He's got caught up in a kind of a vicious loop. Daniel, effectively, do you agree with that assessment that this has all become a bit internalized and the terrorism is now working in on itself?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where I see that's the point where he's starting to be less useful for the Eastern Bloc. Because as you also recounted, he was working as kind of this service provider for Eastern Bloc security services. He blew up Radio Free Europe in pay of the Securitate. He was working for the Syrian regime in the first attack on Paris. So he was, this guy who is just going, and he does our dirty work for us. But at this point, when he, going to blows with the French state, is just the communists are seeing that this guy went nuts, and he's not an useful asset anymore, I think.
So Weinrich will eventually be the last man standing once this is all over. He is arrested in 1995 after traveling to Yemen on a Somali passport, and a Berlin court will sentence him to life imprisonment for the Maison de France murder in 2000. For her part, Magdalena is eventually extradited to West Germany and released in 1985, incredibly enough. She and Carlos will have a daughter, Elba Rosa, in August of 1986. And she lives an itinerant life after the Carlos era. She ends up in Venezuela, then returns to Germany, and she dies in her hometown, having kind of gone full circle. But to understand why Carlos is eventually thrown out, you need to understand the kind of position that Carlos is in. So, a few investment details. So Carlos is, Hungary has joined the IMF in 1982. It needs Western investment, it needs trade, credit lines, and it has become, in that sense, increasingly Hungary first. And as the trade reserves are not kind of stacking up, as this sort of tourism strategy is slightly failing, Hungary is getting in ever deeper. Daniel, so the pushback against the Soviet decision, the Soviets had lodged Carlos in Budapest. It wasn't sudden. It took a while for all of that stuff to constellate. you've described it as a long, half-hearted, patient process. So, how did Hungary start asserting itself?
It is really a process that's driven by necessity. By 1979, the Hungarian model, which is literally just, yes, let's keep like a good living standard, and let's hope that we can eventually grow out our imbalance in trade, just runs out of cash. The debt is on their throats, and before the development really wished for development really takes off. And so that's how they are entering into IMF in 1982. All the while, this kind of more tense time coming in after this Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So a bit more tension between the East and the West. But still, the Hungarians are pushing for better Western relations. And by 1985, they are coming to a point where they feel like, after gobbling up all that IMF money, that we actually can have a bit more of a, push for the takeoff of the economy. And so they are kind of financially loosening. They are investing a bit more to the economy. They are pushing commercial loans again to the third world. And also this is the year where Gorbachev is coming in, so there is like a bit of hope of the Soviet Union being a bit more liberal about their foreign policy. You have Hungary with the new program of really integrating into the West, and so, but you still have all these third world terrorists running around from random Bangladeshi guys to anti-Turkish Armenians to Namibians to Congolese, I guess, at some point, and you name it. So yeah, and that's a kind of a contradiction. You have the tension with U.S. because of Afghanistan, but you want to integrate, but you also host terrorists. So how is that?
Okay, so that's the political context, but it still takes human beings to make things happen in the world of diplomacy. And we're now going to show you two human beings who were quite different, but they seem to see eye to eye at the crucial moment. On the left is Mark Palmer, US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under George Shultz in the Reagan White House. And on the right is Vencel Házy, who was the Hungarian ambassador to the United States and was kind of a big deal in those days. He'd been deputy foreign minister as well. He'd been posted to, I think, Berlin and London. And on the 30th of May, 1985, these two sit down for a meeting. Essentially, Házy is called in by Mark Palmer, and Palmer is 16 years Házy's junior. He's been given a very specific brief. Daniel, what was that brief? Why was that meeting important?
So actually, that's one of our kind of new finds, if I say. The Carlos story was first really well written in Hungarian by László Iszkai, a journalist who also made a lot of interviews with Carlos later. And he did a lot of oral history, and from the tellings of the Hungarian diplomats, it was seen that, yeah, the Americans kind of made an offside remark at a dinner about Carlos being in Hungary, and then the Hungarians just jumped ship and they expelled Carlos. It wasn't the case. It was an official meeting, which we have the recording of. And it was about two things, kind of this really patient diplomatic push. The first was, please just don't export chemical weapons to Iraq in the height of the Iraq-Iran war. And the second was, we want Hungary to stand against terrorism, and we want some of the terrorists to be expelled from Hungary. They were so patient, like at least Mark Palmer, that he didn't really, he didn't deliver on ultimatum. Yeah, he was a bit harsher about the chemical weapons because obviously that stuff is hard. But for the terrorists, he was kind of just saying that there's some high-profile terrorists in Hungary, and we need them expelled.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the first meeting.
And then 8 days later, we actually have the memo of that first meeting, by the way. Daniel dug it out of the archives. So, and then 8 days later, there's a second meeting. And this time, Palmer names Carlos explicitly. And he uses a little bit of light blackmail. He says that, we know that he's here. If that information were to leak out into the wider world, could be very bad for Budapest that you are sheltering this guy. It's an implicit threat, but he also gives him a way out. He says this is a very specific ask. We're not interested in SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Liberation Organization. We're not interested in the PLO. Just give us Carlos. And so this information is kind of taken back home and processed, but nothing quite moves along until a sort of deus ex machina turns up and changes the game. And that is this.
The Beirut, Lebanon airport. For the third time in this continuing 3-day Mediterranean hijacking, the TWA 727 jetliner is on the ground in this hostile environment. As many as 32 men still held hostage. TWA warns the plane and crew are reaching the limits of their endurance. But the pace of developments is picking up. As talks went on, the dozen or more gunmen today released one elderly American man they said was ill. They said they have no medicines on board. In Washington, President Reagan returned to the White House from Camp David to chair a meeting of the National Security Council. The president said the hijackers should free the hostages for what he called the hijackers' own safety. He did not elaborate. On the island of Cyprus off Lebanon, at least 8 men, apparently wearing civilian clothes, arrived by small military jet and boarded a U.S. Navy helicopter with long-range capabilities. And in the eastern Mediterranean, a lone Israeli gunboat cruises up and down the Beirut coast within sight of the airport. In Jerusalem, the Israeli cabinet went into session reportedly to consider releasing hundreds of detained Shiite Muslims, a move which would meet a key hijacker demand. Against the background of this chain of events, the first contingent of now free Americans returned home as this gruesome nightmare goes on for many of their fellow passengers on Flight 847, a third of a world away.
Okay, so this is TWA Flight 847. No one today can remember TWA Flight 847. It's just disappeared into that big sort of sinkhole of history. But it was a really big deal in its time. Effectively what happened is the siege went on for 16 days. The plane was rerouted. It was on the way from San Diego to somewhere else, and it sort of ended up in Athens. I think it was Cairo to San Diego, and it ended up in Athens on a refueling leg, and then it was rerouted to Beirut. There were hundreds of hostages initially. Some were released, as you saw, and this negotiation went on, and this was a sort of a Jimmy Carter 1979 style problem for the Reagan White House. And in part of the sort of rescue efforts, if you will, a US Navy SEAL, I think, was killed in that. And effectively, this just changes the temperature on terrorism in America. And suddenly the Americans, as if they've been pro-terrorists, but they're like, this cannot stand and will not stand, and we will potentially introduce economic sanctions on nations that support and contain terrorists. And so then, basically, Hazi cables Budapest with this urgent warning. He has been briefed by the Americans, and he says economic sanctions are possible. And that's it for Carlos. His cards have been marked. He's done too much. He's too high profile, and the economy is on the line. So on the 15th of September, 1985, Carlos is expelled from Hungary and told never to return. Daniel, maybe you can give us a little bit of detail on the expulsion process, and then maybe talk about Mark Palmer, because he is also quite significant in the post-communist life of Hungary.
Yes, so Carlos had an official relationship with the state security of Hungary. And so actually during 1985 summer he was out of the country in Syria, but then he returned for like a brief stint in September, and when he returned he was officially visited by the state security and said that this is the situation, and we obviously didn't delineate the whole Hungarian strategy of foreign policy, but they said that we need you to leave, and we don't have a report, but I believe they said as well that the Soviets are not protecting you anymore, and so they escorted him to the airport, and that was it for him. They put him on a commercial flight to Damascus. What was the other part of the question?
Okay, Mark Palmer.
Mark Palmer.
Yeah,
that's right. Mark Palmer went on to become the American ambassador to Hungary during the transition process. He has this sort of, oral history / biographic recollections made by the State Department, but he never once mentions that he was the negotiator in the Carlos case, or he had any kind of past before he was routed to Hungary as his first ambassadorial posting. I think that's deliberate. I think this Carlos case was, and also the chemical weapons case, which actually, even a much deeper well, which I didn't really, listen the depth of, was a really important, first stint of, negotiating with the Hungarians and getting, getting their methods, how they are negotiating, how they are working, how they are reacting to American wishes, basically.
So Carlos leaves Budapest, he gets on this flight to Damascus, and he's there until 1990. I think it would have been October 1990, wasn't it, when the first Gulf War breaks out, and the Syrians decide to side with the Americans against the Iraqis, and that means that Carlos is now persona non grata there. So he looks for the least conspicuous place on earth, and he finds it in Khartoum, in the Sudan. And it's kind of the end of the story for Carlos. He doesn't really do much in those sort of final years. And then in 1994, in Khartoum, he is captured.
The day of the Jackal finally comes to an end. After 20 years of escaping an international dragnet, the shadowy international terrorist known as Carlos the Jackal is in French custody.
The greatest terrorist of our time is finally in the hands of justice.
Carlos is blamed for dozens of deaths in terrorist attacks from Europe to Japan. His real name, Ilich Ramírez Sánchez, a master of disguise who frequently changed his appearance through plastic surgery. Carlos's arrest came in Sudan. A former CIA official called him a terrorist burnout who spent most of the last decade swilling whiskey. Yet he remains an almost legendary symbol of terrorism.
He is a walking encyclopedia, not only of the acts of terrorism that he was responsible for, but for everything that's occurred in that area for the last 25 years.
So there you go. Every rock star gets old in his day and just hangs out in a sort of a Sudanese bunker drinking cases of Johnny Walker Red Label. It's like the ending of The Wall, Pink Floyd film. So this is effectively the end of Carlos as anything. He is serving life in a French prison today. And I guess it should be said at this point that many happy returns to him for that. I think part of what we've been doing today has in some strange way glamorized Carlos. And we just always need to bear in mind that this is a reprehensible figure. This man is a true monster. And long may he rot. Daniel, I guess in summary, what is the meaning of Carlos and Budapest and the story we've just told?
When I wrote this story, I felt that it is, less about, specificities of 70s radicalism, Latin American or just, global upper middle class radicalism or these networks, because Carlos was really very much glamorized, but really kind of inefficient cog in this machine. I think what this story is really about, and this is maybe just I'm always reading the diplomatic parts of it, is really about how Central European states need to maneuver the international system. Yes, we can say that in this era, Hungary was effectively a Soviet colony. It's a broad definition, but generally, at every historical age, Budapest needs to, tiptoe between the line of, German lands, Slavic lands, maybe Turkish Ottoman lands or Mediterranean powers, if we will. And this is just another episode of this long story. We see Hungary, kind of reluctant to accept Carlos, kind of bullying him, but still kind of protecting him because they are not sure what to do with him. They want good relations with the West. They want good relations with the Soviets because obviously they are the overlords with their boots on the neck of Hungary. And this is literally showing how the engine of this maneuvering was run in this specific historical age, which is, very different from our age because it was, Cold War and stuff, bipolar age and whatnot. But it is really just, I think it's just showing how eternal is Central European foreign policy maneuvering, which are better or a worse result.
Okay, so we've done the picture, we've done the movie. What about a bit of behind-the-scenes documentary? Talk us through the process of researching this and your work in the archives. You seem to have truffled up a few new things there.
We first researched this, so we researched and wrote this piece with Adam LeBor, who is a writer of several non-fiction books about Hungary in English. And so he was the kind of the mastermind between the story in the sense of calling into question that we can write more about this. So yeah, Carlos Jackal is a very well-known story. There is a couple of books about him by Anglo-Saxon authors, German authors, Hungarian authors, but still there is more behind the story, especially now that the archives are kind of open. What we found mostly was this diplomatic correspondence, especially focusing on the Wenzelházy meetings. That's why it's called Chasing Out Carlos, because we are focused more on the expulsion process. Adam also found very good documents in the UK National Archives about his ties to Syrian secret services. In 1994, like comments of the British Foreign Service about his ties to Syrians and such. And so we kind of wanted to, revise the story and also add a bit of, a bit more depth to it, a bit more, correction to it or addition to it. Because, yeah, archives are open, they are fascinating. This is just one of the, well-known cases that you can see, but there are millions of such cases, I would say. Like, it's really a sea in which you can really swim if you want. And these are not just stories for historians and to say like, yeah, this meeting was on May 2030 and it was official, not unofficial, and so. But it's really it's about really the lessons of how Hungary maneuvered the international system in a really deep level, and it's really full of lessons for, I think, every one of us who are thinking about, public life in general in Central Europe.
Cautious and skillful, unpicking the Rubik's Cube, the Hungarian way. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for you tonight, but thank you very much for attending, and normal service continues. Oh, there's sorry, I forgot about the questions section. Yes, let's get some questions going.
Is there any evidence that Carlos might have been an asset for the Hungarian security services? Did he have a handler or anything like that?
there is no indication that he was used by Hungarian intelligence in any active way. So he wasn't controlled by them. They had an official relationship. They protected him, obviously. I would say it's possible that they even financed him, but they didn't really have a use for him. Ceausescu.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because if the first operation that he launches from Hungarian soil is the attack on Radio Free Europe on behalf of the Securitate, then that's quite odd, isn't it, given Hungary's relationship with Romania?
Yes, absolutely. As far as we know, mostly from the research of László Liszkai and others, especially a German author who interviewed Magdalena Kopp, it was financed by the Securitate. So the Hungarians were obviously allowing it passively, but it was, by all indications, the Romanians who were using Carlos to launch an attack from Romanian soil. I need to admit that, the coordination between communist security services on, like how to control our terrorists in our backyard is kind of murky. They had a relationship, how to handle security matters. They had consultation on that. But for actively using that, we are not seeing it from the Hungarian side. We are not seeing it yet, at least. There are some unclassified documents still. So maybe 30 years from now on.
Okay, we had a question from Sean and then the gentleman in the red jumper, and then I'll get to you at the back, sir.
Just wondering, so he's still alive in prison?
He's still alive, yeah.
Because he was arrested 30 years ago, and I imagine he was retired then. Do we know how old he is? Just wondering.
He is 74 years young, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Wait, no, he would be older than that, wouldn't he? He'd be 76, yeah.
Okay, so I came here in January 1990. I'm from the U.S. I was involved with some of the economics things that are happening here. I can really verify the story about your phones being tapped because I stayed at the Forum down the street from the Marriott, well, now Marriott. And one time I had my Hungarian associates hook up a fax machine because I needed to get some more faxes. I didn't want to go downstairs to the lobby all the time. So I hooked up a fax machine, and lo and behold, the next day that night I came back from work. We were doing economic things in the area. Came back from work, and the manager of the hotel came up to me and said, "Mr. Lawrence, are you doing something different with your room today?" I said, "No." He says, "You sure?" Well, I said, put together a fax machine in the room. Oh, he says, "You tied together all the telephones from the 8th and 9th floor of the Forum where we keep all the foreigners." So we had a little bit of a discussion that day. Interesting life. I know the ambassadors that during that period of time, and they were up to getting rid of him, Carlos. It was a part of the deal to create more stability and make Hungary a better place to set up shop, which we did. We took up and we set up a lot of companies here.
Okay, great. Gentleman in the back, I think.
I have a question about the logistics of being a terrorist. How did Carlos get paid? Where did he keep his money? And was he wealthy, or how did that all work, especially when you're moving from country to country?
He was paid after his jobs, so he was paid especially by the Libyans, Syrians, and the Romanians. His first, big stash of money came from actually the releasing the Iranian and the Saudi OPEC ministers. So they paid a huge load of cash for these ministers. That's why he kind of got into, debate with his boss, Vali Haddad, because he didn't just not kill these ministers, but he also didn't give up the cash. So that was, his first injection of capital. And after that, he was kind of always short on cash. I don't have his accounts, obviously. So he was always looking for more cash. He kept it in his hideout. So I don't know any of, kind of official accounts of him. The Syrians and the Libyans also provided in their diplomatic legations some kind of protection for him. So it's also possible that some of his cash and maybe gold, something, because some of his weapons were transferred by them. So we know the weapons part from the research of László Iszkai. But it's possible that he also kept money at these embassies as well. So they work like that.
Gentleman over here.
Going back to the core subject of Budapest being a den of spies, and we've all seen all the movies and Tinker Tailor and all that kind of stuff. Is any of that true? Was actually Budapest the crossroads that we have all heard over the years of where a lot of exchanges were happening between people that could not necessarily meet easily in other places?
Yes, Budapest was one of the hubs. I would say if we are looking into foreign relations of the Soviet Bloc in general, Prague was actually a bit bigger in a sense of being this transfer place. For example, when the Cubans wanted to push all these guerrillas into South America, they transferred all of them from Cuba to Prague to different Latin American airports. Or, for example, one of the great influence pieces, the Problems of Peace and Socialism, the mouthpiece of all the communist parties of the world, was published in Prague. The editorial board was there. A lot of members were eventually some kind of armed fighters in some part of the world. So I would say, in a sense, Prague was a bit bigger, but certainly Budapest was a place, especially if we are talking about smuggling networks and relationship with West Germans, because, for example, in Prague, West Germans were not that welcomed. But, like, for example, Budapest, Carlos was spotted by an alleged West German tourist. I'm not so sure it was just a tourist, but yeah, it was a big diplomatic fuss about Carlos 1979 because the West Germans said, yeah, we just got like a civil contact that Carlos is in Budapest. Can you please just send him away while our chancellor is visiting Hungary? So they had a better presence here. As we know, by 1990, Hungary was very, and still today, Hungary is very well integrated into German circles. So yes, especially for West-East meetings, Budapest was absolutely a place.
Great. Any more? Eric, nothing? Oh, here we go. Another one.
This isn't really a question, but about 12 years ago, I spoke to somebody who was in the OPEC hostage-taking in Vienna, and I asked them what was Carlos like, and they said he was a real gentleman with impeccable manners.
Oh dear. Yes. Do we know how he looks back on his life? I mean, there have been several. I mean, he wrote a sort of a prison memoir, I think, where it was dictated. Various journalists have interviewed him about his life. Daniel, do you know what the outcome of his life was in that sense?
As far as I know, he's quite open about his exploits.
But if he thinks this was a successful life, it was all worth.
I wouldn't say it like it clearly, like also László Iszkai, I think like 5 or 10 years ago, made a whole interview tome about him. So I think it's face-to-face with Carlos. It's available in Budapest libraries, in Hungarian at least. And so he kind of is open about his exploits. As far as I remember, he's kind of saying that it was like right in a way. Whether he's successful, I'm not so sure about that. But yeah, it's kind of, old man is talking about,
He stands by
his life and exploits. So yeah.
I suppose in a strange kind of way, he was expecting to be killed somewhere in all of that, but he managed to outlast.
Yeah, Erik Hendricks, Danube Institute. I just want to know how effective he really was, because we had an enormous, as a terrorist and as a strategic operator, so he was glamorized, he had this image, but his early exploits were rather unsuccessful, but then later on he was blowing up rather random things relating to France. Did he lead a lot of operations where other people were doing attacks? I heard that he was associated with an attack in Japan where he showed some tactical sophistication. Was he in any way, was he good at terrorism? Was he good at strategy? Did he lead significant operations that actually targeted the capitalist world, hit the capitalist world in a significant way at any point during his life?
Actually, I would say not really. He wasn't the most successful terrorist. So he was ruthless. He was following through things. He was doing it. He was coming back again and again. So he wasn't that kind of, I've been to two firefights and I'm out. He was really reckless, as we've seen, especially with 1982 attacks. But I wouldn't say your average Palestinian guy who shot at Israeli tanks or helicopters was much more of a bother to the Western capitals. That Carlos is bothersome. He's targeting civilians, security risk, but not in the sense of being like a strategic. So that he will topple us. He will destroy key points. Even the Red Brigades or something. The Italians were much more botherful to Italy than like Carlos, who was doing these hit jobs here and there and then just rushing back to his den in Budapest.
Any more? Okay, if that's all, then thanks again for coming to the Danube Institute, and have a great evening.